Hi everybody. So today I think it's going to be the last bit of information, and then that's going to be more time for your research project, whatever the stage of your research project is. So, but I think it's going to be probably very interesting. So I am Juliette Richetin for those who not know me. So and Cristina Zogmaister. But we prepare some slides, but we count on the other people to intervene and to give some input. So the idea was to go through the different steps very quickly, the before and after data collection, or the importance of a checklist. Okay, so it's very important to have in mind what you need to do and, for each step. So when you look at, you have a research project, so you have an idea, and then the idea would be to write down the method, preparation of materials, and all these steps. So we're going to go through all these steps. Okay, I think it's from our experience. It's why I think that everybody can give some input from experience. We could say, okay, you can learn from your mistakes, but if you can avoid some, and if we can help you to avoid some, that would be great. So that was the idea behind that. So, yeah. So before collecting data, so the fact that sometimes one would say, okay, I have an idea, and then, I'm going up to directly to my script, and then I run my study, and I collect data and analyze data. That would be, at first one would say, but the fact that we heard so many things before, and for registration and all the things, and the writing up a method once you have the idea, it's also a help for the next step, for example, for registration. But it's also not only for that, but it's, if you're like me, a very bad memory, if you run a study and you have basically an idea like this, and then you have your data and you don't really remember, you have to go through the script to remember that it was 200 milliseconds in intervals between the stimuli, or all this kind of thing. If you write down everything, it's one, to help for your memory, to clarify the aim, and it's also to, when you write down this method, you can talk to other people, because first you clarified what you want, and it also helps to communicate with the others, to confront if you have some collaborators or your supervisor, or it's easier, to discuss about something that it's already written, rather than just some ideas that are just thrown like this.
And also to make it explicit, I would say, because sometimes you assume that something is in a way, your collaborator assumes that it's different, and until you write it down, you go ahead with in mind two different experiments, basically. And so, yeah, it's really helpful.
Yeah. So the idea would be, like a very simple document in which you have aim, procedure, hypothesis, the kind of analysis you want to do on that, and the sample size that we talked about, power analysis and all those kind of things. So inclusion and exclusion criteria. So depending on the samples, it will impact the sample size that you need, and also the timeline for all the steps. Because when you say, okay, I want to run a study, and in 1 week I will start data collection. Yeah. You need to be realistic about the time that you need for all the different steps. So, and you can't say, well, I'm going to start a study next week and I don't have anything, just have a rough idea. Kind of not really realistic. So it's also useful to have those timelines for everything. So yeah, it will help. So we already say that, clarify the aim, check for potential incongruity. So, with your colleagues, you clarify, but also with yourself, so I have this aim, but And it was, you know, I do that to the same, but when I look at the procedure, I'm like, am I really doing or looking at what I would like to look at? So, and then, yeah, realize that you would need, maybe you need to go to summer school to learn something about, you know, mixed models, because, you know, the kind of data I will collect, I might not be able to do the analysis, so, or, you know, trying to find the best way to analyze the data. The other things is the ethical approval, but we're going to talk about that, pre-registration, and write up papers about the study. Because once you have your method, when you change things, so you know, you refine your ideas, you discuss with your collaborators, and you have the ethic approval that asks you to add something, and then all this kind of thing. When you arrive, you collect the data, you analyze and you have your results. To write up a paper, it's much quicker because you already have your method that it's already written. So, you know, and you can write it, you know, using R, for example, when you're using, and you enter also the script of your syntax and all this kind of thing. So everything will be ready, and it will, you know, you won't have the blank page, you know, stress that, you know, where I'm going to start to write a paper. So it's kind of easing the thing. So the first step is that not the first step, but once you have defined the specific protocol, usually now, I think it's a very good practice. I don't know about Kinshasa. At least I can talk with for Milan. It's not mandatory, but it's very recommended. So you submit a request for approval to your institution from the ethic committee, and also because now many journals, they ask you, you know, if you have request ethic approval, if you have the informed consent, if the participant had completed the informed consent, and how, and all this kind of thing. So I don't know how it works for us. In Milan, we have different type of ethic committee depending on the. You are in the ethic committee, so maybe
yes.
You can talk about more
we
about
have two ethical committees. One is for the, let's say, easy studies, in which the population is not a special population. So people are not underage, people are not, how do you call it? Popolazioni fragile population.
Yeah.
They don't
At risk.
Sorry?
At
At
risk.
risk.
At risk population, right? And then if there is, it's a minimum risk study, so a study which involves basically no obvious risk for the participant. In these cases, we can go to one ethical committee, and the procedure is much faster. Like in 1 week, we get the response. The response is just typically they specify better this or this. In all the other cases, you get to the other committee, which will really take the lente di ingrandimento.
What?
Lente di ingrandimento.
The lens?
The lens to look
Zoom.
at every specific aspect of your design, and maybe also ask for changes and stuff. And so you also have to know that in one case it can just take 1 week, in the other case at least 1 month, I would say. If you are lucky.
Okay.
So, yeah, take into account also the ethical committee. I don't know how it is in Timisoara.
Or in Ghent.
Or in
In
Ghent.
Ghent, it's kind of.
Yeah, I would say it's more than 1 week, even for the easy one.
Yeah.
But usually, so in Ghent we would submit like a whole project. So for instance, for my postdoc, I only submitted one project for some categories of studies. Not
Okay,
like
so
for
it's
a
umbrella,
specific-
okay.
Yeah, it's an umbrella. So, like
But
easier.
do you have two committees as well?
I don't know.
And Jan is not the end.
Here, so I don't know. I only know the one for typical studies that we would do with the non-academic. But
Okay.
risk population, I don't know.
We have only one committee. But for the moment, this committee is not so old. Let's say it's less than 1 year, maybe. before that, all such studies that require ethics approval went to another ethic committee, but that ethic committee was specialized in all kinds of ethical aspects. I don't know. A student which was harassed by the teacher, or people who, so it was not a research specialized ethics committee. And for the moment, our study has been quite chill, so we didn't have any, because we don't have medical school and we don't have engineering school within the university. So we didn't have studies on special population, not even on children, or studies have been not doing.
We have studies on biology. I don't know how they deal with those levels of
Yeah.
They don't ask.
No, if they are, they ask for permission, but even if they are on biology, they are not on stem cells or genetic modification. So for the moment, yeah, I'm curious to see what the other commission, the second commission, is doing. It's probably, yeah. But we can discuss us during the dinner. Yeah.
Okay. So this was the part for the ethic approval. We would, yeah, I think that one thing that you learn, through the years is that when you have a study ready, you need to run the study with a couple of participants and mock participants in the sense of to see, how long it takes. Because if you're, okay, I can estimate that, I run the study because I built it, and it takes at least 10 minutes and, around 10 minutes. But usually, given that you were doing all the stuff, you don't read the instruction, you know what you did, so you understand the task and all this kind of thing. So it's not really reliable. So you need to probably ask other people. In the case of a longitudinal study, this is fundamental. If you do not try, I remember with also Erika, we worked, with an app, and the app at the beginning didn't work. So you need also to check the data, that the data are saved correctly and all this kind of thing. Because especially when it's so heavy, that you require a lot of energy and money and all this kind of thing, or resources in general, you need to test. To test whether everything works the way you want it to work, because otherwise you collect 30 data and it's like, oops, I forgot to include something in my study that was fundamental, okay? Or, longitudinal study and someone, I knew something like this, and I forgot how to, to include something that combined all the data of the same subject. So, it's like after 50 subjects, it's kind of a problem. So all this kind of thing, and store your script. And I would say having the same kind of logic that Jamie talked about, because usually especially when you work with Inquisite, you do a small thing. It's like version 1, version 2, version 3, version 5, and then in the end you don't remember which one is the correct one and all this kind of thing. So you need to have a system to store your script.
Also because final is not enough, because in my computer I have final, the real final. So.
Exactly, so you need to find a system. Okay. Right. Okay. So, oh yeah, maybe we could ask you, Jan. Jan, can we ask you a question?
Yes.
We were talking about the ethic approval, so we talked about how it worked in Milan a bit, and in Timisoara. Marine told us about the umbrella thing, but is there differences, or how long it takes and how complicated it is, or?
Yes, sorry, I thought we would start at 2:30, but I didn't. In Ghent, the ethics approval, well, we have an ethical committee in our faculty, and we have a medical ethics committee. So anything that has to do with patients, whether this is a questionnaire or some invasive procedure, as long as it's something with patients, you have to go to the medical. That's the only official organ, legal one. The one in our faculty has, it's there, but it has no legal status basically. But of course, if you go there and they give you approval, it's like your colleague saying, okay, this is okay for us. So if there is a problem, I think you as an individual can say, if somebody makes a complaint, you could say, yeah, but my university said it was okay, so then it would be a problem of your university. But basically, it's just an informal okay.
But if you need, for example, when you write a paper, sometimes they ask you to have even the number, the approval number, and if it's an informal thing?
We act as if it is in
Yeah, I think it's the same like by us.
Well, we have numbers.
Yeah, we do have the
because
number.
it's a sub.
But formally, it is not valid because we don't have a series of figures, of the institutional figures that should be people that are experts in.
Yeah, it's a delegation of the
yeah.
ethics committee from the university. We have it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, but it works
Yeah, at least.
from the front.
Yeah, the journal, they don't spend their time, trying to, you could put the wrong, don't do that, but you could do that. Okay, so then when so you created your study protocol, you're kind of sure that everything works, you have everything you want, you're clear about, the study is supposed to tap into what I would like to, to study. And so in different talks, these days we talked about registration and reproducibility, so I think it's quite clear. Just we're going to go through two examples, okay? Yeah, the fact that, for example, the ethics committee might be after. Because if you change something, then do you need to go, it depends if it's a big change or not, because in our case, for example, if you need to change a small thing, you just, maybe you just send an email saying you're changing this questionnaire for the other, or, but if it's just, if the registered report and someone is saying, well, you should do something else instead of what you're doing, but if it's not big changes, but you need to adjust depending on how flexible your ethics committee is, and but anyway. So we're going to see very quickly two ways to do a pre-registration. So Marco talked in length about the usefulness of pre-registration, so we are not going to into details. So I'm going to start with as predicted. It's personally the thing that I use the most, but it's not very, it's not exhaustive, but it's at least, it has the basic, most important thing that, you should report and the pre-registration. So it's very easy. You just go to the website and you log in. Obviously, you create an account. And then you want to register. So to pre-register a study, it's very, you click on create and then you put all the authors, okay? And then you have a series of questions that you need to answer. So for example, data collection, starting or not, hypothesis, dependent variable, and they insist that this description should not be too long. So, it's why also you need to know exactly, and I think it helps also to be very precise about what you want to study and what are your hypotheses. You need to be, precise. A dependent variable, and then conditions, okay? So the condition of your, in your study, what kind of analysis you want to do, how you intend to deal with outliers and exclusions, and sample size, so how you determine sample size, and other, if you have other questionnaires you want to include that are not part of your dependent or independent variables, and then a title, and then what kind of study the project is. That's it. Okay, so it's really the basic information about what is the aim of the study, what is the main procedure of the study, the main dependent and independent variable, what kind of analysis, and sample size. So it's, I would say it's the minimum required for registration. And yeah, it's, some of you already tried that. Yeah, Milano, okay. Okay, now I leave the floor
Yeah,
to
this is the
Cristina.
not the only possibility, and also the kind of registration that you do, it has to be related to the kind of study that you are conducting. It's better if you know that there are many possibilities. For instance, till now I registered a meta-analysis, and for that I used Prospero since it had an health-related outcome. I also pre-registered a scoping review, which might kind of sound like strange. Why would you register a scoping review? Well, it's for the sake of transparency, to let people know that, all the passages that we went through, they were decided not because we wanted a specific result to come out of this scoping review, because we wanted to find certain kinds of studies. It's really to be open, even if you don't have any specific hypothesis. And on OSF, for instance, you'll find different kinds of possible pre-registration templates. And one that I find particularly useful if you want to conduct an experimental study is the one that they created. Let's see, the name is better. Yeah, OSF pre-registration in social psychology, because this one asks you so many questions that really help you think about all the aspects of your research. And now I'll let you see very quickly what they are. For instance, yes, here I created a kind of fictitious pre-registration to let you see, for instance, well, first there are the hypotheses. You have to be specific on the hypothesis, and they, since it is a social psychology research, they explicitly expect that you have an interaction effect hypothesis, and so they ask you to describe the number hypothesis, so you have to put H1, H2, etc. For the interaction effect, they ask you to describe the shape of the interaction, so not just that, okay, I expect that there is an interaction between explicit and implicit self-esteem. No, please come on and tell me which shape this interaction has to have. Another thing that I like of this is that if you have if you are manipulating a variable, they ask you how you will check that the manipulation has worked. And so this reminds you that it's better to have a manipulation check in your study. So it's really, I think it's useful because really it helps you think about the study. And then there are, these are mandatory elements. Then there are others that are recommended, like for instance a figure to let you better explain what kind of interaction you're expecting. Or yeah, you could also write down the theoretical framework. This of course is not mandatory for registration, but sometimes it might be useful because yes, our memory is not always that good. If you have just a reminder even for yourself of why you had certain hypotheses is not bad. And yeah, then there are other recommended aspects, or you have to specify. For instance, here is separately the independent variable, you have to describe it better. Then also the dependent variable, you have to describe it better in details and so on. And yeah, I would just suggest that you go and watch this pre-registration template, because it really, if you do this kind of pre-registration, you really have the method ready for your study. And then, yeah, the procedure. Okay, the kind of analysis that you are gonna do, which which statistical technique you use, and this kind of stuff for all the predictions. And yeah, this is basically, here there are some links that can be useful for different kinds of pre-registrations. As I said, there is not only as predicted and the OSF, there are many others depending on what of your kind of research. And then going to register reports. I don't know, was I too fast? No, I don't think so.
You going to use OSF only?
Yeah.
Well, I use the exact same template that you presented, and I think it's a really good, I mean, at least I think it's a really good template. Sometimes, yeah, when I see in the analysis parts,
Sorry?
sometimes in the analysis parts, yeah, it happened to me that I realized at this point that the analysis I wanted to define as correct or unexpected, and that some information would be missing here, and then I had to rethink about how to analyze the data. So I think it's a very big one.
Yeah, and also, a thing that I forgot to mention is that you can also pre-register the specific script that you will use. And this is also very useful. I mean, you can also create some mock data or collect some small data, and then you create your script, you check that it works. So you may realize at that point that there is something wrong in the way you collected the data, or that, I don't know, and then if you do have the script, you can also pre-register that one, which does not mean that then you cannot make any changes. I mean, you pre-register a script, you get some results, you decide that there are some other meaningful things that you want to do. Also, I don't know, data transformations, you can do it. The important thing is that then you explicitly explain what was pre-registered and what was not. So it's not that this pre-registration is something that puts you in a cage, you know. It's just something that really makes transparent what you were thinking, then what you were planning, and what you did because you saw the data, basically, or because for whatever reason.
One thing maybe could be important to because I've seen people not doing this, but if you pre-register a study, one advantage is that you get a free boost in power just because you can register
the
direction of the effects. So you essentially half your alpha level, and I mean double your alpha level. And
Yeah.
So you mean you can test one-sided?
Yeah, one-sided test. So
And in fact, this is a thing that I usually do. I mean, if I explain that I expect the result in a given direction, there is no obvious reason why I shouldn't do it one side. So yeah, this is a really good point.
Yeah, I would also jump in and say that when I do pre-registrations, I don't use any of these templates. I make a separate Word document, and when I fill out the most basic template, I said, please see the Word document. Because so like, I mean, you can't really see it, but like there's just one that we did before for, this is from a published paper. It's got very similar information, but it just gives it a greater, a greater degree of flexibility, because you can still have the same level of specificity, but at the same time you don't, if there's some moments where you're like, I don't know which section this goes into and things like that, I found that when I get into a dilemma like that, I go, I'll come back to it, and then sometimes I forget. Whereas with this, I would pre-register this, and indeed along with the analysis and processing scripts. This is also helpful because when it's in Word document format, there have been so many times where when I've written papers, I have taken the literal pre-registration document, and that's my method section, and often part of my introduction and my results section sometimes. So that's really, really handy.
Yeah, I totally agree, but I would say that if you are new into pre-registration, it's better that you have like a path that is already, that you just have to follow, because otherwise the risk is that you forget simply to mention something. So I agree also, because one point is that if you put something on OSF, then you have the timestamp of when you have done, I mean, it's not just a Word document, then you can change and then say, hey, this is what I pre-registered. No, I mean, it's time-stamped, and so it's still a proof that this is what you wanted to do. Yeah. But yeah, I agree that there is also, but still there are other templates that you can use that are more free, like the one that I used for the scoping review. Of course, was not that one. It was one that was really flexible. But
I would still fill in one of the, like the most basic one, but then when it comes to like, the most basic one literally just says, please give study details, and then I just literally write in C pre-registration component for the study details. But it's also just nicer for me because it fits into the folder structure. But to be honest, I would also say that I usually link my OSF repository with GitHub. So also have my pre-registration on GitHub too, because that's also, you can get timestamp information. Yeah, it's super handy.
questions? So we should get ahead with the register reports. I don't think that we have to say much about this, as I mean, Marco was really here explaining it today. But well, I would suggest that at least I really love the on cos.io the register report sections, because there you can look at the journals and see which journals are accepting this kind of paper format, and so it helps you decide where to send your work. But I don't know if there is anything else that we can add to, or that you want to add to.
Yeah, so I don't know if you will talk about that later, maybe, but it's about the deviations from the registration.
Yeah.
So it could be that sometimes you deviate from the registration because you have a justification for that. And the deviations can be major or they can be minor. So yeah, how to handle that?
I think it's the next. So,
Okay.
But yeah, it's really a good point. Also because okay, after the data storage.
Yeah, but it's the next one. After this one.
Maybe related to the registered reports, a small thing, there are also registered replication reports, so triple R's. Those are specific for replication studies. Some journals also accept that.
Yeah, and I think it's also useful, especially if you are at the beginning of a research or at the beginning of pure research career and you want just to know if something works. Well, I often just tried to replicate the study, but I never published it because, I mean, it was just to know if the effect was there. But now, I think that if I really want to do something like this, I try the triple R strategy. So I'll do it. I have the information that I need, and also the rest of the world has it. So, and also I do an application.
It's also a good exercise for a PhD student, for example, because you take the method of someone else and you try to do the whole thing, and also because you have a critical eye, so it's also really good. Yeah.
Just a couple of comments. One additional advantage of the register report is that you get the review before you start the study. So often you go study, you think that's great, and then somebody says that is confounding, this is unclear, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. So another additional advantage of the register report is that you get at least a big part of this process, you get it before your study and not after your study. That's, I think, is important. And the second is that we are at the beginning of all these kind of things, so there are still some misunderstanding, tweaks, kind of situation in which you think, well, there's something not clear there. I just make a couple of examples. There are sometimes, from the perspective of editor, reviewers not necessarily agree that, for instance, a register report, you can have a register report also after you collected some data, but the register report is about the final part of the study. It doesn't make any sense to say, no, you collected data, you cannot ask for a register report. It happens that somebody says this, or you do an exploratory, a pre-register analysis, and then you say deviation from, you do analysis, they say, no, you shouldn't do this because you said that you have done this. I mean, one of the best recent most nice feedback that we got from a paper was a reviewer saying, well, you did all the kind of pre-registered hypotheses, but you did not stick only to this, also the additional analysis one need. So, thanks God. Because, I mean, the point is that when you say you do something, it doesn't imply that you don't do anything else.
Yeah.
But just you distinguish between what you did, that you say you did, and what you do based on the data, which can be even more important than the rest. But you make a distinction. Sometimes there is still some kind of rigidity on this sense, so people might, not everyone appreciate this, not everyone appreciate that register report doesn't imply that you know nothing, but implies that you know up to a point, and then you say, I want to discover this thing. So.
But I think up to a certain point, because it happened to me to review a paper which I said, okay, this is a pre-registered paper, and then they say, okay, but then we realized that maybe participants didn't know very well the language, so we inspected the responses, and we decided, like the first author decided to drop like half of the sample. Yeah, then so, with a certain, that happened for real. Yeah, but 1/3 of the sample, I'd say, yeah.
Yeah, but at least, I mean, it becomes, I would, as a reviewer, I would like be, I don't know. But at least the point here is that since they pre-registered that they would have a certain sample, then if you see that the sample is, so they cannot then just tell you the story with the I don't know.
That's what they asked.
Yeah, if they register that they would collect males and females, and then they discover that the analysis works only on males, they cannot write a paper only on males because, or at least they have to explain why they are doing the analysis.
Actually, that's a specific story. They did then another pre-registered study, and then they got a completely no result, but they still claim that based on the result of the previous studies, the result was there. I mean, but the general idea is, I agree that you should be able to do things beyond what you pre-registered. If you may have reasonable deviation from the pre-registration, this does not mean that you can put the half of pre-registration and whatever you want afterwards. Yeah,
while still claiming it's pre-registered, right?
Yeah, once it's claiming it's pre-registered.
Yeah, because it doesn't eliminate the fact that a document was written, but it does just say, well, I mean, yeah, a country can have a constitution, but if it doesn't behave in accordance with its constitution, then you can't say it's constitutional. You know?
On the other hand, that's the point of pre-registration. You had the possibility to check what paper did. That doesn't fit with what they did.
Yeah.
And without that, they could claim, yeah, we wanted to do this and that. There were no proofs. So because they wanted to put that hat, you had the possibility to check if that was true or not.
That's from the Bayesian point of view. It's perfect. You have the private. And you have
Right.
So you can't have the private. Registration is private.
I mean, that's to say, registration is good. It's not that. It's just that the risk, of course, is people wanting to say, I pre-registered to get published more easily, and then deviate from that arbitrarily. That's not so.
Yeah, the point of deviations is really, I mean, as a reviewer, if I would discover deviations that are not, or as an editor, if I would discover deviations that are not clearly and very openly and explicitly described, I would be like, very angry at the minimum. But and also there are the major and minor deviations. The major ones have to be really very clearly described in the main text of the paper. But also the minor ones, I would expect them to have at least a note that describes it. Otherwise, it's a problem. Yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned after something, but comes to my mind. There is also a new format getting out very cheap papers. They're called multiverse analysis, meaning that you do a series of analyses that could be reasonably done given the data, and you present all the results, and you see how much of the results are affected by the analytical choices that you could reasonably do, given the kind of data, the kind of question. They call it multiverse analysis. I didn't see many papers with that, but the format is out there, so could become more popular as a way to solve these degrees of freedom. In the sense of, okay, I acknowledge that this can be done in different ways, and I do these different ways, and then I show you the universe of the results.
There are a couple of packages that are like, well, they have been developed, but they're still in development to do multiverse analyses. Yeah, because as Julio says, they're quite complex to actually implement. But they seem to be getting easier indeed, and they're more and more popular now. I would also say that this is basically just, we're coming full circle to what Nadine started to say, which is that if I personally, if there are deviations in my study from a pre-reg, regardless of how big or small, I always have a deviations from pre-registration document that I always accompany with it. Yeah, because it's super handy to just, like, you can of course also report the most prominent ones in the paper, but usually it's handy to like also be able to footnote it and say, please see deviations from pre-reg document for any minor deviations at all.
Yeah, this is a good idea, in fact.
I think that's the most important thing, is that you should not be the judge of whether this is an important deviation or not. So like basically you should, let the reviewers judge whether this is important. You should not be the one to say.
Then, I mean, also, well, how to make the data available has been discussed this morning. But I really wanted to stress the importance that data have to be fair, in the sense that people that are going to just check your data or use it must be able to do it. So, for instance, don't put the data available on SPSS, which a lot of people do, because then not everybody will be able to access them. And
The name, like Jamie talked about this morning. Format and the name that you understand what is.
Yeah, and then also make them findable. I mean, there are some people that still are kind of against putting the data open, but it's really a problem because it's not ethical to not make the data open to everybody. If possible, really just that you can go there and use the data, because it's not your data, even though you collected them. And so I really want to stress this point.
Before going to the next slide, I just want to give an example to understand if the FAIR principle is correctly understood. Because I read all kinds of documents and they are written in a wooden language at some point. So of course, for instance, if you put something in the open science framework, so that's a findable place and it's accessible. And to make it interoperable, it means that there should be, I don't know, CSV file, or I don't know, and usable to attach a code book. That's all, or what? If you have some other definitions for interoperable, reusable.
But for findable, it would be good to have some tags that tell what kind of data it is. So if somebody is doing research, I don't know, on something, then if you have the tag, the person that is searching for this kind of data is going to find it. So it's not just enough to put the data on myself. It's better if you do all your best that the other scientists can use the data again, because this is really the ethical thing to do, to have also the other. And reusable, is basically that if somebody looks into the data, they understand what they mean. Basically, I don't know, this is the easiest way to describe it.
I would also say like interoperable is important too, because I mean that means like don't use don't use Kali Linux or something, which is a hacking language, is a bad example, but like don't use a language that's specific to a specific operating system or something. Like a Windows specific, I use Mac, and if there's a Windows specific program that I'm supposed to use, then I literally just can't open it. So it's not interoperable because it can't be used between different machines. And it applies to the software as much as it does to the actual data files.
But, and I was at the university. You have somewhere to deposit the data in Ghent?
In 2013, I was part of a new group at the university for data management, and that was one of the first things we said: we need to have space to store our data. It's still not there.
Oh, okay. Because
in the university.
In the university, we have servers, but you have a limited space. Until now, if you go to the information technology department, they will give you some extra space up to a certain limit. which for us isn't a problem, but I wonder what my colleagues in neuropsychology do with all their scans and so on. So I don't think it is a problem.
Yeah, well, we do it also the repository in Milano-Bicocca, but I don't see, at least for myself, I don't see the advantage of using my university repository if there is another one that is used by the rest of the world.
There are a few things. Well, first of all, the university is the owner of those data. So in principle, you should get their permission before you put their property on some server in the US.
Even was that you can also put them in Europe.
Yeah, okay.
The principle.
The principle is the owner should take care of their own property. So I do think I do ask in my team to put everything on our lab as a shared, which is maintained by the IT department, and I ask them to put everything there also. So at least that we know directly where it is and that it is owned.
And also some European grants require that the different universities have this data repository. So the university is doing this also because without that they couldn't access these programs without having a repository. So maybe they are not really interested in advertising the institution because they don't care, I don't know. But they have to access the resources.
But are they findable? I mean, can I find the data of your university if I search in Google? Or
no, this is purely for us internal use, so that but we also put it on the OSF.
So you can
do both.
And I was also wondering, but is it also true for our university that basically they are owning the data, Marco? The data that we collect, is it also true for us that they are owned by the University of Milano-Bicocca?
I don't know if legally, in the sense of this, I don't know, but surely, I mean, conceptually, you would think you are employed by them, so of course it is for them. But this is in Italy, it's a strange thing because we don't have a national contract like other public employees. We have a special contract from the 30s, from the fascist period, that we are not, for instance, just to give an example, we are not, you cannot have for the kind of counting hours for university docent, whereas for a public employee you do have. You pay by hours. We are paid for a kind of general contract. Within that, there is also protection of copyrights in terms of if you write a book, who is your book? It's your university property, your property. So most of the time it's your property, not university property. Whereas it depends on whether you make money with this book. And again, most of the time in Italy it's your property because it's part of, but there are occasions in which the university can claim a share of the royalty. So it's not a straightforward issue because of the legislation in Italy. So it's not like, in principle, could be, but it's not.
Okay, right, good. Sorry if I interrupt, I just want to...
Yeah.
No, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Otherwise we...
Talking about data, I don't know, I never tried like the R Markdown, but I got really fascinated by it, and I think that maybe it can become part of the pre-registration. And but if not, or if you deviate, it's really important that you keep track of everything that you do with the data. Yeah, this is basically what was already mentioned here, but again, it needs to be emphasized. And if you also make the syntax, the script, and all of this stuff available, then it's really open science. And
just to confirm to the people, it might sound like an abstract, far away from my bed type of issue, but if you run studies, be prepared that in a few years, in 10 years, in 20 years, somebody comes and sends you an email, could I please have these data for a meta-analysis? Yeah. And I can promise you, then you scratch your hair.
Yeah, this is an exceptional point. At least I think that sometimes they ask for my data and I spent like 2 days finding it. And sometimes it happened that they asked for my data and I just said, go on OSF and you'll find it. And I was really happy that it was there. And once actually it happened that they asked for some very old data. I didn't have it anymore. My colleagues didn't have it. So it was really, I'm a little bit ashamed of it, but we don't have the data anymore. And this is something that should never happen. That, I mean, you have something published and there is not the data. There is no transparency at all in this case, but yeah.
And it is still a problem. Like only last week, I was working together with somebody from the experimental psychology department who had a link via a project. So she left, and we had a paper published. I asked, where are the data? And she said, yeah, I put everything on the OSF except the raw data. They're only the raw data were only on her hard disk drive. So if I wouldn't have asked, we simply wouldn't have had the raw data. And she said, no, it's OSF, not the raw data. So it's definitely still not common practice, but it should.
Yeah.
I think also something to jump in on that point as well is that I think sometimes people's reluctance to share raw data is because they're worried about identifying information, all that kind of thing. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with having, which I've had in a couple of projects, an anonymization script where you basically run this initial script that removes the identifying information, replaces it with pseudonyms or numeric values or whatever, and then you just put that data up online without any identifying information.
Yeah, even though it's more difficult in certain areas, like I spoke a lot about these issues with people from qualitative psychologists. For them, it might be a nightmare to make them anonymous because, it's really different, especially like let's say you have a video and the audio, I don't know, there is the participants on the video is really, how can I anonymize it? Yeah.
I think in this case, though, then it's a matter of putting it into consent forms, where you basically say, because I mean, for me at least, I think there is an ethical issue with not making these data available. Wherever possible,
I agree, but it's not always possible because, then you would not make some kind of research because it can have consequences for the participants if they are recognized, especially if it is in, how do you call it? Sensitive, or let's say you're talking to a woman, she's speaking about her husband, and I don't know, she can really say things that could...
There are situations in which you cannot.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if it's transcribed data, you can remove identifying information. It's harder, it's not as systematic, but at the same time, for me, my perspective at least is that if we are scientists who want to write papers based on data, we have an obligation to the community that others can verify.
But I think that I agree to a certain point. But at the same point, if we want to reach as many scientists as possible, we don't have to be too strict with the rules. So with this, in these situations, I would say, okay, don't make them open. You just put them on a repository. You make clear what the person can do to access the data, that the person has to be a scientist, and then the person can access. But then I would never put them open. It could have consequences. Also because it's not necessary that if you take away the recognizing information, it does not mean that somebody would not be able to still recognize them. Like, I don't know, this data that you collected in a specific hospital, and then you put together the hospital with another information, you really get what the
but it can be an extreme. I worked with in a group with a sociologist, and so she recorded data and sessions in the hospital, and we were a research group. She didn't even want us to look at the video and transcribe because she said, well, it's going to be, you might recognize something because there were some doctors medical doctors in the research, and you say, well, you might recognize the person and all that. So even as part of the research group, she was so good and on her data, claiming that that it was to protect, but at the same time, even in the research group, we couldn't access the data. So that's kind of, you need to find the right balance.
just to make things more complicated, I would add one layer that we are scientists, let's put it this way, so we think, well, we should have data available, and so on and so forth. People in an ethical parts of the law aspect, they are focused on the protection of the rights of the participants. So, for instance, just think this kind of conflict that happens is that, in principle, according to the law for protection of data, every time the data are used, there is a concept called should be for a specific use of the data.
Really?
Yeah.
Which means that if the data are reused by another scientist,
You can't just put it.
well, I mean, we have been told that you should contact the participant. The participant should say, this can be analyzed the data.
But
It's a complicated issue.
it only applies to if you have not
Unanonymized.
yeah, or not anonymity, but anonymous data. If you have truly anonymous data, then it doesn't apply. So you can do whatever.
Not that been told, plus that told a different story.
The
Plus that
method
told
is
that
different.
every time somebody's reanalyzing it, I mean, when you ask somebody to consent, you cannot ask for all possible analysis of the data. You have to ask for this type of analysis.
Let's not have that discussion because that's like a you can discuss that for hours.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
nobody
yeah.
really wants
The
to-
point-
And you're scaring.
But I think that the point is also what it may be different for different nations. We have the ethical committee of the psychologists in Italy, and I spoke with one of them a few weeks ago, and she was saying exactly this. Then what I do in my daily research life is I write down that the participants is consenting to the specific ends and also to the use of the data for other ends. And then they sign it. I know that the Italian Ethical Committee won't be happy, but they won't have no Italy. But in fact, in Italy, it's like this. But yeah, maybe it's different in the rest of the
Related to that discussion, I have one concrete suggestion. So when we in 2013 started with these discussions, indeed people who do qualitative research were very hesitant on doing this. And then we did basically a minimal thing, which is require a data storage fact sheet. And this simply lists who is the
Yeah.
researcher, what are the data related to what paper, and where are the data. So they could simply say, on my heart, this is right. But then, and that needs to go with a PhD, so all PhD students had to make for each study such a thing. But then at least, first of all, they have to make explicit that it is only on their heart, right? Like if I'm on the committee for a PhD, I'd say, I see you only store it on your hard disk drive. Could you please do something about it? But at least they're explicit about it, and then you can ask them to do something about it. So I think it's a very small step, but it is an awareness-raising step that is accessible for everyone.
Yeah.
One super quick, very, very last thing, which is that I can't remember the exact package name, but I do know that for quantitative data, in extreme cases where you really want to not have, if you really don't want to share the data, the specific numeric values, for whatever reason, there is a package that basically extracts the parameters of the data, like the variance covariance matrix, and then simulates new data with those exact parameters, but without any of the original data, basically. So then you can rerun the analyses and get the same, or most of the same, like relevant estimates, while also on a completely fabricated or synthetic data set.
That's the data used by Ariely for the fabricated data analysis.
I mean, it's then just share the covariance matrix.
Yeah, which, of course.
Yeah.
Because
But yeah, there is a whole literature about this stuff that's out there, but I think that for most of the studies that we are doing, the people in this room, we can easily make them open, and I would go and make them open. Okay.
Authorship?
Sorry?
The first point.
Yeah, the authorship. Yeah, I don't know. My suggestion would be, I don't know if all agree here, that it's better when you decide a research project that you decide from the beginning the authorship and discuss it with the co-authors. And there is this private taxonomy which can be useful. It's not necessary, but can be useful for this aspect. And
It avoids some kind of conflict afterwards.
And also to be clear who deserves and who does not deserve to be part of
Because
a paper.
may not be a problem, but by experience in medicine, they fight like dogs. It's really, I've been there. I'm like, what? Yeah, you can put wherever you want me, but they really fight because the sooner you decide, the better it is. Really.
Yeah. I've been a member of the Flemish Committee for Scientific Integrity, so we get these complaints from all the universities, and I can say like 2/3 of them relate to authorship issues. So it is really important.
Yeah.
The thing we recommend from the committee is that at least in your paper you have a contribution statement. So we haven't done that in our team yet as a policy, but I think we should as a kind of.
And many journals ask. Yeah.
Yes, and journals ask it now also. But this is here. Do you ask? Would you discuss authorship just before starting to write the paper, or at the beginning of the?
Whenever possible, I discuss it at the beginning of the project, just to be sure that then no surprise comes out. But then, if things change, I mean, we are all adults that should be reasonable, so it can change.
Is that not very early? Because during a project, sometimes people get interested. And
Yeah, then of course you can change. But like I'm thinking about the one that I really began very recently. We just decided who's gonna do what. Then of course, if something changes, the person is taking on more load of the research will change. But at least to have clear how much commitment you're putting in. I don't know, if possible, I think the earliest the better.
I think in research, define the responsibility.
Yeah.
You decide the authorship before running experiments or writing a paper. And you say, okay, you will be first tutor, but you have to do this, and that. If you don't do that and I have to put other people, then maybe we need to rediscuss it. But I mean,
I think
it's just.
But for a PhD student, it's also difficult. I think as I speak as, as an older person, and, and when you're a tutor, you need to be careful of that. And because, you're a PhD student, you don't, oh, I think I did most of the job, but I just end up, after so many people, you don't, I think that they are not really.
But I think that's a skill to train up in PhD students too, to teach them to talk about these things, because I mean, we lead by example, right? And if there's so many cases of PhD students who will never learn to talk about those kind of things, and as a consequence, there's a lot of conflict for those people because there's no clear way to navigate that. Whereas, I don't know. I think discussing it at the front end. And like, not saying like this is the case, like as you say, keep it dynamic and say, look, and be open about that too. Is like projects unfold, people's priorities and responsibilities change with other things, and we're just going to keep clear on who's doing what. But it's like I think it's a skill that needs to be trained up.
But it's also a very difficult issue because people have different views on what important contributions are and who has contributed what. And it's okay if you have easy people. I mean, people who try to be fair, but sometimes with certain persons it can be. And that's why I have been reluctant to make this into a formalized rule in our team, because you create also problems by doing these discussions. You can create problems by discussing these issues.
I agree. I mean, it's better to work with reasonable people, let's say. But if you do not discuss, then the problem is that the people may say, okay, I deserved to be the first author because I collected all of the data. I heard also master's students that said something like that.
that's good. Okay.
But if you explain them, okay, you will be in this position because you only collected the data and there is all this kind of stuff, then it's easier also for them to understand why they are not the first author, even though they collected the data.
But I think that the real problematic situation arises when there is a disproportion of power and money between the authors. And then, if you have like a lab head which is reasonable, then I think everything can be solved. If you have a lab head who is not like is a greedy about authorship, I've seen the worst thing happen. And then it's not nothing that only involves the people like in the lab. I think is enough to solve this kind of things. You need someone above that, and it may not even be enough. Because, yeah.
But to know that there are instances in which you can address your complaint, this is already something. Because usually, you know, PhD student or master student say, oh, I collected the data, so I was be the first author. I don't think it's the majority of the cases.
No.
It's usually, you know, the other way around. So, but knowing that there are some, you know, some, I don't know, councils or something, that institution to which you can address your, you know,
I
problems.
think that another point of view is to give value to the like credit statement in the assessing processing of the researchers. Because if you just count how many times you are first searcher, which is okay, it's clearly that you gave probably the highest contribution, it's fine. But if we start using these credit statements more and more, so you know who did the analysis, and you see it's always the third name, but basically all the analysis of a lab is done always by the same person.
Yeah,
Then maybe you can better figure out what's the role of each researcher in the paper. It's more difficult to give quantitative assessment when you go to like grant proposals or something like that. But yeah, maybe you can better understand the role of each one without saying first is better or the other are bad. Second, I'm on the page.
Yeah. Another thing that I think well is important is that we do not always publish on open journals and then you can make your preprint open. And I find it also again useful to use this Sherpa Romeo, which if you go there and you write the name of the journal, you know what is the policy, if you can make the preprint open, and which one, if it is the one that was accepted, the one that you submitted first, and etc. So I would suggest to use this, and you can share the preprint in various ways. And easy one is to use the Saiha. I don't know how to pronounce this, but that one.
So in our team, some years ago, I made up like a kind of journal list with the preferred journals that we go to, and then the least preferred journals. So that it's explicit for the teams, like what are our principles and what are the journals that we aim to submit. And our top category are the gold open access ones, like Collabora and Royal Society or things like that. Royal Society Open, and then the society-owned ones are next. Depending on how strict they are in terms of their green open access policies, and then completely at the bottom are the privately owned closed ones with one.
Yeah, this is a great idea, and I don't know, I would ask you if you want to share this.
Well, maybe we should simply put it on our website.
Because every time, I mean, if you have to decide every time, at least it would be easier.
But the Rome is very good. One thing about preprints is there's a lot of different views on this. I know one of the biggest arguments for preprint, for publishing so preprint is basically when the draft that you have made, which is ready to be sent to a journal. So before you send it to a journal, you put it already on Psych archives. For me, I think that's a risky policy, because at that point the paper can change so much that it's almost unrecognizable by the time that it's published. Others do this, but I know that like in physics and so on, they do it before, but there's I think a lot less that can change to a paper than in psychology. So.
Yeah, but still there are journals that agree that you can put as a preprint the last version that you that has been accepted, but is without, you know, the formatting, right? And in this case, it's really useful also for the other people to add. But yeah, I had the experience of putting as a preprint the first version, and I'm not so happy that I did it. But you know, you learn by experience. So yeah, I agree about this. But every time you can put the last version, I think it's a great idea to do it.
I'm sorry, just my feeling about this and also about the open data, GDPR and stuff is that for me, I'm always scared because they involve some kind of legal thinking and legal knowledge, which it's the farthest knowledge from what I know and I can handle. So I always feel kind of endangered when I have to deal with this stuff without any formal or informal preparation. Like, I don't even know what Sherpa is, essentially. I know this is a website that kind of tells you what you can and cannot do, but can I really trust it? Can I violate a little bit? I don't know.
When you upload on the BOA, it's on the right side.
Yeah,
It's
I know.
automatically checking
I know.
your paper.
I think on that though, what I find useful is if there's something that I'm not sure of, like, I mean, Twitter is your friend. There are people that, like, people even like say, I go read as a perfect example. He said a bunch of legal issues, but like legal challenges from different publishers like Elsevier and places like that. When he's uploaded, say his papers to his website after they've been accepted in their journals, like just basically, there are many people out there who have had similar issues, and when those things happen, there's a lot of discussion amongst the academic community on Twitter about like, okay, well, what are your rights here? What can you do? What can't you do? And it's been, for me at least, very informative on some of those things. So, yeah, I mean, you're not alone. We're not lawyers. We're psychologists. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. People have had these experiences too, and it could be useful to, in my experience.
But that's why the Sherpa Romeo is so good. They list for every journal what you can and cannot do.
Really? I've never seen this stuff before either. So
I discovered it a few weeks ago, and then I used it, and this is why I thought I had to share it here, because it's useful.
So it's not because sorry, when I looked at it, I thought it was just like it tells you whether they accept preprints or not, but it's much more than that too.
Sorry, it tells you?
When I saw the slide, I thought all it does is tell you if it accepts preprint.
Yeah, but
it's
also
actually
also the specifics of which preprint you can put on.
Do they have an embargo period? How long is the embargo period? Are you allowed to publish on your own website, on public, also privately owned website?
Yeah.
All the policies are clearly stated.
That's awesome.
Quick follow-up for the archives, you can basically create a story of your paper, so you don't want to upload the first version before the editor. It's also, well, I never did it in the book, but you can also think that sometimes during the review process you have to change something that you don't really want to change in that direction, but you do to publish it. And so you can basically create a history of your paper from first your handmade manuscript, the one that you submitted, to the one that is almost published. But yeah, I never did it.
Sometimes it's embarrassing.
True. I would say also that on that point too, or like very related, is that I mean there are a couple of journals that encourage this explicitly to get like open peer review, where members of the community can also simultaneously review the paper because it's been put up there, and give you like there's lots of examples I can think of at least where people have said, yeah, I uploaded this here, and while it was under submission, someone contacted me and said, hey, you should try this analysis or something, and that they found that it improved it. So I know it's not always the case that it's, of course, every context is different and so on, but.
Another one, sooner, some journals now are starting publishing their review process together with the manuscript as a supplementary material. So all the exchanges between the reviewers and the authors.
Yeah, meta is
also good practice.
Yeah. Also because they are more careful in the way you give the. Because sometimes the reviewers can be really too harsh without any real reason.
Because they have power position.
Indeed. And even journals like Meta Psychology have open peer review where they explicitly say they will tweet out the paper and say, we are making a call for a review for this paper, go to the link here, blah blah blah, and then of course you get credit as a reviewer and your reviews. So I don't know if it works in all cases, but there is some argument for that as well, that it can help make your paper better.
Yeah. Okay, here are some checklists that maybe useful, like the transparency checklist, that it's useful because it helps you think about all the aspects from the pre-registration on, so you do not really need to check it at the end of the procedure. You can also use it at the beginning stages. Then there is, of course, if you're doing a replication study, then the checklist for replication studies may be useful. And yeah, here you see some of the materials that we will not go into detail, but you'll have on the slides if you need it. Yeah.
So I let Cristina did all the job, so just to wrap it up. So yeah, now we would like you to work on your research project and whatever the stage of the research project. So I know that some are already at the discussion phase in the paper, so asking for feedback. Some others are, I don't know, thinking about doing a pre-registration, what should I do, or someone planning a first study, and from where should I start. So the idea would be that you work on your research project, and we are all of us are here just to help you, and whatever you need with your, that would be the idea. So yeah, just wherever you are here in a research project, some of us can help, and do not hesitate to ask. Already we did that on some programming, some analysis already, but this is your time. So, and I think we will have until there will be the break in the middle, but until 5:30 or something, or 5. I don't know if you want to do the wrap up before or.
So we have then a coffee break now.
Yeah. What?
I think that now it's time for coffee, right?
Yeah, because I started at 2.
Okay.
Vice President.
Something.
Yeah.